From the New Arts and Media Studios in Milwaukee, I'm Charles Purcell. This is The Log. Let's start with a correction from yesterday's program. I said, okay, this is weird. I misspoke. I meant to say combustion engine, and I said combustible engine. Now, that's an easy little slip that anybody could, I suppose that could happen to anybody. But it's especially weird because, I don't know if you'll remember, several weeks ago, I told you on this program that that the previous night I had awakened in a cold sweat, just certain that I had made that same mistake, said combustible engine instead of combustion engine in a previous episode. And I went back and looked over my notes, and I even listened back to portions of some of the shows, just mortified that I had said combustible instead of combustion, and not only once, but several times, at least 3 times. I was sure that I had done it, but I couldn't find it anywhere. So I guess it was just sort of a dream. But then yesterday, I actually did it. So it's this weird sort of meta deja vu situation we've got going here. And throw in psychic. I don't know what's going on. I anticipated this psychically in a dream several weeks ago, this mistake, and then I did it. So I know it's combustion engine, and I know of my mistake, and I'm sure you caught it. I know it's not combustible engine. So there's that. Hey, I got my COVID shot yesterday, shot number 1 of the Pfizer vaccine in my left arm. Getting it done. All right. Feels very good. A very pleasant little walk over to University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee Health Center. Actually, it happened at the Student Union, and they had a big old ballroom, the Wisconsin room, I think they call it, all set up. Nicely run, very efficient, lots of volunteers, or, well, I don't know if they're volunteers, but lots of people there to assist. And there you go. So when you are eligible, as soon as you are, go get that vaccine. It's a race. We are in a race to the finish line here. We got to beat these variants. Oh, man, this story, if there's a theme for today, it's a little schizophrenia, because regarding Washington politics and regarding COVID, oh my goodness, there's good news, there's bad news, there's good news, there's bad news. I'm not sure how to feel about this half the time. I want to be optimistic about COVID, but my goodness, all the new variants, and after steep declines here in the last several weeks, now we've hit a plateau, and in some places even an uptick in cases, and where there's an uptick in cases, obviously there's an uptick in deaths, of course. And, the stories that we just don't want to believe. We don't want to talk about Florida and Texas, especially Miami and all of that, the spring break stories. Oh, my goodness. And I think the part of the COVID story that keeps me from being happy and optimistic is when you look at it internationally. Europe is having a really tough time for some reason getting these vaccines in people's arms. I couldn't be more pissed off at the general notion that the vaccine itself is still subject to private intellectual property rights of a select few pharmaceutical companies. This is crazy. This is insane to me. How the recipe, if you will, isn't just openly shared with the world and everybody's just on this. There are just tons of products on the market that we can do without for a year or two. Just halt production on everything else, get every available person on this task of producing the vaccine, distributing the vaccine, producing all the materials you need for it, the syringes and whatnot, whatever paraphernalia is required. You get the necessary labor out there to do it. Just do this globally. In fact, that reminds me of another correction. I think, unless this was also a dream, I said a few weeks ago that hundreds and hundreds of nations haven't had a single shot yet. That was just a mistake. It was 100 nations. And even there, that was an estimate. I know it wasn't hundreds and hundreds. So let me make that correction. But the point remains the same. All of these nations across the globe who at that time hadn't had a single shot yet, and to this day either haven't had a shot or are tragically, woefully behind while the variants continue to mutate. And every expert worth their degree tells us the same thing. Until this virus is solved globally, we are all at risk. That's how viruses work. Everybody knows it. The experts know it. They're trying to tell us. And cases are up globally. On average, 100,000 new cases per day. India's in a second wave. Europe's in a third wave. We're holding steady with a slight uptick. And now there's this very disturbing little item I heard that in talks with Mexico, the Biden administration has offered assistance on the vaccine in return for help at the border. Now, there's nothing wrong with asking for help at the border, but to use the vaccine as an incentive, as some kind of bargaining tool, well, that just implies that, yeah, we've got the ability to help you, but we won't help you unless you do X, Y, and Z for us. Now, granted, it might be good for everybody, but the very fact that you use the vaccine as a bargaining chip in international relations, and I've heard, I don't know if this is true, you tell me, I've read accounts that that very notion is cropping up in international relations around the world, that diplomats are telling allies, well, yeah, we'll give you a better deal or we'll help you out with the vaccines if you see things our way on international trade, for example. And the Russians and the Chinese are doing the exact same thing. Oh, not the way the world ought to work. Nope. So, yeah, I'm pretty conflicted about COVID right now. Generally, I think Biden's messaging is about right. I mean, there's hope, there's light at the end of the tunnel, but we got to stay on our game. We got to absolutely stay on our game here. So, mixed feelings. I got mixed feelings, man. I'm conflicted about the whole COVID and vaccine story right now. And that's generally true for all of Washington right now, especially the administration, the White House, and the House, and Senate Democrats, for that matter, who we've got mostly on board here, except for Sinema of Arizona and Manchin of Virginia. West Virginia. I always do that. Yeah, the Democrats, man, they are hard to figure these days. Let me read from the Washington Post. I think this is from a day or two ago. A funny thing is happening in U.S. politics right now. President Biden and Democratic leaders are working closely with the left on a variety of fronts. And while complications, challenges, and future divisions loom, it's all unfolding more smoothly than you might have expected. And the political sky isn't crashing down on Democrats' heads. In fact, Americans appear to be concluding that things are getting better. This wasn't supposed to happen. The GOP's 2020 campaign narrative, made especially poisonous by a certain former president, was that Democratic rule would run the country into the ground precisely because Democrats would prove wholly captive to their crazy socialist left flank. Take the $1.9 trillion rescue package. While some outcomes disappointed the left, the ultimate result was the most far-reaching piece of progressive legislation in a half-century. Its scale and ambition secured precisely because Democrats refused to chase GOP support, unified the party. Senator Bernie Sanders called it, quote, the most significant legislation for working people that has passed in decades. So there you go. There's reason to be optimistic about what the Democrats are doing in Washington right now. I mean, between Joe and Nancy, the House and the White House, they're just ripping it up. After the $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief, now they're working on infrastructure, they're working on universal pre-K, they're working on climate. They got a $3 trillion package in the works. Mayor Pete, the new transportation secretary, was just out yesterday talking to the press about a whole new transportation era, as he called it. less emphasis on cars and roads and more emphasis on public transit? I mean, it's all the things we want to hear. And big money, big investment. And the House, my God, the House. Immigration bills, Dreamers, farm workers, Medicare for all. They've passed bills on gun sales, on gun safety, closing the so-called Charleston loophole. This sweeping legislation on gay and transgender equality. Of course, the voting rights bill, which is on everybody's mind right now, H.R. 1. I mean, they're just going to town. This is not your everyday milquetoast, corporate-friendly Democratic initiatives we're used to. They've finally learned the lesson. I mean, how long did it take? Years to learn the lesson that this Republican Party, as it's currently constituted, is not going to be any help on anything. So what's a lefty to do but feel pretty good about this? And believe me, it's not easy. It's not easy. I just saw this week a review of Jonathan Allen and Amelie Parnes' book, Lucky, How Joe Biden Barely Won the Presidency. And much of it details how the Democratic Party just waged war on Bernie Sanders. Just like they did in 2016, they picked it up in 2020. There was no way that was going to happen. And Joe Biden, the luckiest guy in the world, just sort of stumbled his way into the presidency. The most unlikely win in generations. A terrible candidate, everybody's last choice. And if not for the fact that the Orange Menace was the worst thing to happen in America since forever, and then COVID just devastated the whole nation, there's no way Joe could have ever been elected. His refusal to accept basic things like Medicare for all, student debt forgiveness, $15 minimum wage, he won't fight for it, can't bring himself to have any sort of real vision when it comes to climate or Black Lives Matter, completely rejects the notion of defund the police, won't even entertain the general idea of reimagining public safety. And as Allen and Parnes point out in their book, it was mostly about defeating Bernie. There was no way the Democrats were going to allow the left to represent them in 2020. Which to my mind made no sense at all, because every single voter that walked into a voting booth and voted for the Orange Menace already assumed that the Democratic Party was being run by so-called radical socialists. It didn't matter. It didn't matter. So going with Bernie or going with a progressive wouldn't have gained a single vote. And to my mind, well, this is crying over spilled milk, I suppose. We'll never know for sure, but to my mind, it would have gained plenty. You certainly wouldn't have done any worse. You still would have won by 7 million votes, and I'm guessing by more. And then it's no longer just about the election. Now we're talking about governing. Now we're talking about let's get in the White House and let's do this thing. But the reason I'm schizophrenic today is because what we're seeing so far is Bernie and the progressives having a tremendous amount of influence. You might accuse me of being naive at this point, but I don't know. Definitely steps forward, no doubt about that. Yeah, the Medicare for all just still pisses me off. The refusal to fight for $15 minimum wage. The backtracking on student debt forgiveness. The John Kerry kind of corporate-friendly, middle-of-the-road approach to climate change, and the fact that when's the last time you heard climate change even in the news? When did it make the top headlines? Do you remember the last time? I don't. But if everything's relative, and I guess everything is, compare this to a second term for the Orange Menace, and there's no comparison. And even compare it to any single previous Democratic White House. Going back to FDR, you're not going to find this kind of enthusiasm about big projects, about big ideas, about climate change, about transportation, all of it, about healthcare. So I am all over the map with my feelings on this. And I guess if Bernie Sanders can stay in there swinging, and he can play the happy warrior and claim victories occasionally, and he can talk up the administration, who am I to not follow suit? You know me, I don't have heroes. I don't worship anybody. Nobody's a saint. But damned if I'm not going to give some respect to Bernie and try to echo his enthusiasm. Why wouldn't I? So, as conflicted as I am, I'll take it. I guess I'll take it. And I think maybe the one thing where I want to congratulate the Democrats is what I mentioned a couple minutes ago. They really have finally gotten it into their thick skulls that the Republicans aren't coming along on anything. They've just given up on that. And I think that's fine. It's way overdue, but I'm very glad that they've done that. I think they need to keep pointing out just very simple truths about the American people. You know, every politician, right, left, and center, wants to say, well, the American people want this, or the American people don't want that. Yeah, you know, that rhetoric is so old and tired, I don't think people really hear it anymore. I think it's in one ear and out the other. When a politician pulls that out of their little bag of tricks, what the American people want, nah, nobody hears that anymore. But what they will hear is hard facts. When you cite the polls, for example, 94% of American voters support universal background checks. That's according to the latest Quinnipiac poll. An earlier poll by NPR, 89% supported background checks for all gun purchases at gun shows or other private sales. So you can pull out these kind of numbers. And there are similar numbers for Medicare for all, for student debt forgiveness, all the things we've talked about. We got the Amazon workers organizing in Alabama. And Joe Biden, of all people, when asked, used the most forceful language, I think, from any president ever about the right to organize. He was unequivocal. So there are reasons to be optimistic, to be happy about this stuff. Democrats have introduced a bill to help bridge the digital divide once and for all. Broadband, internet accessibility. The pandemic, there's another truth that's been revealed about how many kids were just unable to function. It was tough on, this has been tough on all kids, but some of them just had no chance. And there are also things happening sort of on the inside baseball stuff. Recently, the Nevada Democratic Party, this is from truthout.org, progressive takeover of Nevada Democratic Party leads to mass exodus of staff. Shortly after a slate of insurgent progressives endorsed by the Las Vegas Democratic Socialists of America pulled off a clean sweep in Nevada state Democratic Party elections over the weekend. This was from a couple of weeks ago. The party's executive director notified newly elected chair Judith Whitmer that the entire staff, as well as every consultant, was quitting. The mass exodus of party staffers following the progressive takeover of the Nevada Democratic Party leadership, as well as the establishment's funneling of hundreds of thousands of dollars out of party coffers in anticipation of the results, is detailed in new reporting by The Intercept, which described the election outcome as the culmination of a years-long battle between the insurgent progressive wing of the party and what's known in Nevada as the Reid Machine, a tightly run operation still guided by former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. So, progressives have taken over the Nevada State Democratic Party. This is great news. I'll give you another example, maybe even more important. Well, let's see, what am I reading right now? This is from Vox a couple weeks ago. In a victory for progressives, the DCCC ends its consultant blacklist. That, of course, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. That's what we're talking about. Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. The controversial policy had prevented the DCCC from using vendors involved in progressive Democratic primary campaigns. Let me read a little bit of this to you. When current New York Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez secured a stunning win in her 2018 Democratic primary over longtime Representative Joe Crowley, progressives and digital consultants alike celebrated. Her historic campaign combined youth outreach with innovative digital marketing strategy, and a cottage industry of progressive high-tech consulting groups popped up in her wake. But the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, House Democrats' campaign fundraising arm, had a different reaction. Under a controversial 2019 policy known as the DCCC blacklist, consultants and firms that worked with primary challengers were barred from contracting with the DCCC in a bid to protect incumbents and help re-elect existing Democratic House members. Now, newly elected Chair Representative Sean Patrick Maloney, Democrat of New York, has followed through on a campaign promise to reverse the policy. Quote, "This policy change means that the only criteria for a vendor to be listed in the directory are our standards for fair business practices related to use of organized labor, critical diversity and inclusion standards, and other minimum qualifications." For 2 years, groups like Justice Democrats, a progressive political action committee that supported the successful challenges of OAC, and Representative Jamal Bowman, and Middle Seat Consulting, a digital consulting firm that has successfully used social media and text message canvassing in electing progressives like Representatives Ayanna Pressley and Cori Bush, were sidelined from working with or being recommended by the DCCC. So without getting way into the weeds here, which I think I've already done, the point being, progressives, both candidates and the consultants working with them, the firms, the kind of people you need, we don't like to think about this, but there's no way you're going to get elected without a really nicely well-oiled organization, especially if you're going to primary a sitting incumbent. And so for the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee to first blacklist progressives and now to reverse that is huge. So without sacrificing my lefty bona fides, I really honestly feel pretty good about what's happening right now. Nancy and the House are just tearing it up. They are writing progressive legislation. The White House has their back. Joe and his administration are putting together proposals on infrastructure, on climate change, and all the rest. In our endless fight against Democratic centrists, I'm not calling it. We're still in there fighting. I'm not calling the fight, but we are ahead on points right now. We are winning this fight in this moment. That's why there's all the media attention on the Senate and on the filibuster, because now that's the final roadblock. And even there are reasons to be optimistic. For all of Mitch McConnell's blustering, people aren't buying it. His threats to burn down the Senate, his scorched earth threat. I mean, what else has he been doing for the last how many years? Ever since he got the gavel. Of course, he doesn't have it now. Chuck Schumer's got it. But that's all he's been about, is making sure that nothing gets through the Senate. And nothing has gotten through the Senate for years, except Supreme Court nominees and the big tax cut, the nearly $2 trillion tax cut for rich people. Name one other thing the Senate has done. A couple of COVID relief packages. And there again, I don't want to go down this road because it's way too lengthy for the time we have remaining. But the COVID relief packages under the Orange Menace, it's already been revealed that so much of that money just never trickled down. And history will reveal more clearly how our crummy little stimulus checks were a drop in the bucket compared to how so-called small businesses that weren't and corporations were able to take advantage of those original bills. This last one, from what the experts are able to tell us, and this is way over my head, I don't pretend to know the truth about this, but from what I read, this last one, the money's actually going where it's needed. Yeah, the Republicans did a lot of whining about how so-called rich people were going to get stimulus checks, which was just so comically ironic. But for the most part, this money's going where it's needed. In fact, there was even a provision in the act that prohibited states from using this COVID relief money to cut taxes. Because apparently that's what they did previously with relief money. And the Republicans fought tooth and nail against this provision in the bill. But yeah, red states are simply not allowed to do that now with this one. The spending has to go to approved programs to fight COVID and its resulting economic hardship. Can't just use the money and cut taxes for rich people again. So, as hard as it is for me to say, the Democrats are getting it done. And thank you, progressives. You're winning the battles. This is far from over, and we have huge institutional, systemic problems that need to be addressed. So don't get me wrong. I'm not just going to sit back in my easy chair and say, okay, well, all right, I guess we're done now. No. But to my shock and delight, progressives are having their day. And to repeat our mantra around here, good policy is good politics. And if somehow we can break this logjam in the Senate and do something about that damned filibuster and pass some legislation before the 2022 midterms, that policy is going to translate into great politics. It's a pretty wild, bold prediction to say that the Democrats could hold both the House and the Senate. But could they? Is it possible? With these ridiculously slim margins? The first midterm after a presidential election? It's never happened. The kind of margins they would need to hold both houses. But who knows? Who knows? All right. Well, there's some politics. There's some politics. Final thought. I really kind of wish Joe had promised as a candidate to serve only one term. I think that would have been best for everybody involved. Because as great as things are going right now, we can't count on the guy long term. I'm still not convinced of that. I don't believe he's suffering from dementia and all the sort of things that the Republicans talk about. I mean, he is old. There's no doubt about that. But with all the good news I'm seeing, he's still not out of the woods for me. I'm still holding open the possibility that we need to primary him in 24, because I'm still not convinced he's the guy we need for the long haul. And especially when I think about climate and the urgency of the climate crisis. So I think it would have been better all around if he had announced it. Or maybe he could announce it right now. You know, I'm going to do one term. That little fall he took up the stairs, I got no problem with that at all. Conservatives and Republicans are really reaching to make anything of that. They do realize he was literally running up the stairs when it happened, right? He was running up the stairs, and after he got himself up, he continued running up the stairs. When did you ever see the Orange Menace run? It's impossible to even imagine. So I got no problem with that. That's not the issue. He's just not the guy. So far, there are a lot of good things to report. And thank you, Bernie and the rest, and the squad, and people getting it done. Thank you. I'll definitely take good news where I can find it. But I'm also not just going to be swept up into just blind enthusiasm. All right, well, we'll keep an eye on all this. Okay, that's it for today. I do love you. I'll talk to you tomorrow. I'm Charles Purcell.